experience, and a little bit, I learned, I think my story is unique in the sense of I had a pretty bad athletic experience. I hope none of y'all have bad athletic experience, but I do think it's important to talk about because it certainly shaped my perspective in coaching and all that kind of stuff. So, to kind of give a little bit of context, obviously I coach lacrosse. Lacrosse is not common in South Carolina. Certainly, when I started playing, it was very, very new. So I started playing in 2005, 2006. I was about 15 or 16 years old at the time. And then my junior year of high school, let me back up for a second. I've always wanted to teach. I've always wanted to be a teacher. My mom's a teacher. We had teachers in our family. Like, that was something I knew that I wanted to do. But I didn't really know coaching was something I wanted until my junior year of high school. My junior year of high school, we had pretty bad coaches. Again, lacrosse is very new, so the coaches we had no idea what was happening. We were just told to run and run a lot, and good luck about everything else. So really didn't have much instruction. So anything that I learned with the sport itself came from like watching YouTube videos of UNC, going to local clinics if we could find any and stuff like that. So my junior year of high school, I ended up teaching my entire team how to play man defense, and that was when I knew I wanted to coach, just because I so much enjoyed teaching them how to run a man defense and the interactions we had and the lessons and that kind of thing. So from there, like, I thought, great, like, I love to coach, I want to teach, I'm going to go to college and be a teacher, because I don't know where you guys are from, but in South Carolina, specifically in Greenville County, you have to teach before you can coach. So I just thought, this is just perfect, this all just works out. And I'm sure for some of you, especially Georgia, I know that's the case too. So anyway, so when it came to college, looking for colleges, I was getting recruited, and I knew I wanted to stay in state. And at the time, there were only 3 programs, 3 colleges that had women's lacrosse programs. So my options were extremely slim. I ended up picking Converse because they have a pretty reputable education department, and they were a new lacrosse program. And I thought, great, like, I can go, I can be a stud right out of the gate, like, you're welcome, here I go. So I go to Converse, and was humbled very fast playing college lacrosse. But I had a horrible playing experience. I had 3 head coaches in 4 years. I had coaches play mind games with me. I had coaches overwork me. I had one coach who actually liked me, but my whole team hated her, so I don't know if that says anything. So, you know, I can give you a couple of stories about how bad it was. I had my senior year. Again, let me preface this by saying, on the lacrosse field, you can only have 12 girls on the field at a time, 12 players on the field at a time. My team had about 15 players. So that's 3 subs. And if you've ever seen a lacrosse game, it's a ton of running, nothing but running. So needless to say, like, we were very sorely overworked. So anyway, my senior year, we had this coach, and if you get 2 yellow cards in a lacrosse game, you're done. Like, you get kicked out for the game. My first yellow card I got, and I came off the field, and my coach said, if you get a second one, you're not playing on your senior night. Like, I still think I didn't deserve the second yellow card, but I got a second yellow card, and so I couldn't play for the rest of the game. And my coach looked at me, and he said, you're done, like, you're not playing your senior night. And that just wrecked me. We won the game, so I was, of course, happy about that, but I'm walking off the field, like, mortified and so upset that I couldn't play on my senior night. And I walk up the hill, and my parents were like, what's wrong with you? And I was like, I can't play on my senior night. And then this dad from another parent walked up to this coach and said, why is it after every game you have a girl coming up the field crying? That was just one example, and I know some of you might think that's kind of silly, but again, I had coaches tell every single player, oh, you're all going to be all conference. Like, just mind games on mind games, overworked. I ended up having a tear in my shoulder my junior year because we never got any rest. Just all, pretty much a lot of what not to do. And I think I still wanted to coach, but I didn't learn the right thing to do. Learning what not to do is not the same as learning the right thing to do. And I think that's kind of what kick-started my experience. So anyway, I go to Converse, like I said, as an education major, wanted to teach, And within education department, you have to take the praxis, which is the state test. And you can only take so many courses without taking the praxis where you continue on that degree. So my sophomore year comes around, I've taken the praxis and I failed it like 2 or 3 times, and I was so upset. I failed the math portion, and that's what held me back. And I remember getting my exams at midnight, or getting my results at midnight, laying in my bed, and just putting my phone down and just sobbing. Because I was like, God, like, why did you take this from me? I felt like this was very clear, this is what you wanted me to do, and all of a sudden it's getting ripped out from underneath me. So I had to change my major, change it to English because I was good at it, and I really had no desire to do anything else. So I was just like, sure, English, whatever. So I changed my degree to English, and I had no clue what I was going to do after I graduated. Until one night during my senior year, I was sitting on the floor of my dorm doing homework, and I got a call from an athletic director at a local high school, actually my alma mater, Hillcrest. He said, hey, I heard you're graduating. I have a position opening. We have a loophole the way we can get you in, and you can coach. I was like, done. So I ended up getting that job at Hillcrest. Now, I was dating a guy seriously at the time, and this is relevant, so bear with me. So I was dating a guy seriously at the time, and then he was a year younger than me. We just decided, like, we were pretty serious, like I said. We knew we wanted to get married, so I said, you know, I'm going to live with my parents because the coaching job at the high school level is actually like a tip. It was more like gas money. Like, we couldn't live off of it. So he ended up, after he graduated, getting a job in Atlanta. So the plan was for us to get married, and then I was going to go to Atlanta with him. And I loved coaching at the high school level, loved it. However, I can tell you that being a young coach, I thought I had it all figured out. I was right out of college. I would go to this program, and I mean, I did well. We went 13-2. We had a first-time program win over Riverside High School, which had never happened at Hillcrest. We went pretty far in the state playoffs, and then we got robbed, and I'm still bitter about that one. We could have won state that year. So went really well, and I so enjoyed that experience. But again, like I just knew it was kind of a means to an end because it was just not paying well. And I knew I was going to get married. Like I knew I needed something to help support us. So I was actually interviewing with high schools and colleges in Atlanta for coaching. And they offered me some jobs. I had a couple job offers from a high school and a college. And really it was just a matter of like saying yes and going forward after we got married that December. Well, like I said, since I was still at Hillcrest, one of my juniors at the time actually committed to North Greenville. And North Greenville at the time, I think this was 2014, 2015, they had just started a program. The person that they hired was not a lacrosse person. The school couldn't find the right person to lead the team, so they just kind of grabbed a special teams football coach, which is great. So good. Bless his heart, he did the best he could. So anyway, he was hired. So anyway, I encouraged my junior to commit to North Greenville, and that coach gave me a call, and I was sitting in the parking lot at Hillcrest when he called me, and he said, hey, like, I so much appreciate you sending Hannah our way. Hannah Hawkins, for those, you know her, she's a big catalyst for this. I so much appreciate you sending Hannah our way, like, I think she'll be a great fit. Tell me how you know North Greenville. I was like, well, both my brothers graduated from here. We know Dustin Fools, like, it's just down the road. And he was like, great, well, you gonna be my assistant coach? And I was like, I'm sorry? I was a little taken aback that he even said that to me. And I said, well, here's the catch. I'm getting married in December. To be honest with you, my husband, my fiance at the time, the job that he had was totally commissioned, so it was kind of a question mark with that as well. And I said, I need to talk to him and I'll let you know. So I called my fiance and I was like, hey, like, you'll never guess what just happened. Like, I just got this job offer. Like, this is a dream. Like, what do we do? And he said, you know what? Do it.
Yes.
Yeah, he was like, he was super supportive. He knew that this is what I wanted to do, and he knew, especially considering that the guy was not a lacrosse person, was probably going to be something I could eventually take over. So we knew there was a big promise for pretty big potential future of my time here at North Greenville. So he told me to do it, and he actually quit his job in Atlanta. It's kind of funny. Quit his job in Atlanta, moved to the basement of my parents' house, and lived there for a couple months until he found something. He ended up finding a really good job working at Cintas, and then we got married and then moved to Greer. And so for the first year of our marriage, he was working for Cintas and I was here as the assistant coach. Now, again, still a new coach, stepping into a new program with a guy who doesn't know anything about lacrosse. He had to find girls who didn't know anything about lacrosse. We had this weird mixture of kids who had played in high school, but a bunch of kids who had never played before. So it was very weird, odd dynamic. And I think some obvious natural conflict and tension with those two worlds colliding. And here I was, had this program, like setting a program record at Hillcrest, like coming in, I was like, you guys again, you're welcome, part 2. You know, like, you're welcome, I'm here. Super cocky and arrogant about what I was bringing to the table. So I think, just to pause for a second, I think there's only a few things in my life that I know that the Lord has made clear to me, and one of those has been coaching. Like that, without a doubt, the Lord was like, no, this is what you're doing. He shut the door of education, and then he opened the door for coaching full time. And then since then, he has proved over and over again, this is what you're supposed to do. No matter if I fight him or if I get crazy and frustrated, no matter what, like I believe coaching is a calling. And with my experience, I think that just kind of proves that. But anyway, that's a side tangent. So yeah, I was here as the assistant in North Greenville, and we was there for a year, and obvious conflict between him, the coach, and me, and like the team, I think naturally kind of responded to my coaching just because they knew I had coached lacrosse and played lacrosse. And anyway, so I think it was that March, that first year, he decided to step down and he gave me the program. He gave me the program the day we played Converse, my alma mater, and I was like, great, we're gonna lose by like 20, and we did. So it was all good. So anyway, coming into that summer, it was like totally my program. I had to start recruiting. When I got the team, to be perfectly honest with you, I had a somewhat of a vision of what I wanted to do with this team. I think in your coaching careers, vision, understanding your vision as a coach is super important. Like, winning is not, everybody wants to win. That's not, like, if you're into coaching, you really don't care about winning, I think you're in the wrong profession. Every coach wants to win. That is not unique. What's unique is your process. What's unique is your culture. But again, so I didn't really understand that at the time. So coming in super cocky, I thought I had all figured out, and I got humbled super fast. Like, I had 30 kids quit in the course of like 2 years, which, I mean, again, I had somewhat of a vision for what I want to do with this program, but I also think it's a little defeating when you're trimming the fat and then you get to a point where you're at your bare bones of a 12, 14 people roster. So anyway, flash forward a couple years, I think this is the 2017, 2018 season. I started learning and understanding. I started studying different coaching philosophies. I started reading about different coaches and that kind of thing, understanding positive culture, and that's something I wanted. And understand, I think positivity is often mistaken for being soft. It's mistaken for not working hard. It's mistaken for, like hugs and rainbows and butterflies and not getting any real work done. And again, that was kind of my thought process going in because of my horrible college playing experience. Again, like I learned what not to do, but that doesn't mean that's not the same as learning what to do, if that makes any sense. So 2017-2018 season rolled around. I think I'm getting my years right. And again, I was starting to dabble into this idea of what it means to have a positive culture, and I had a pretty bad staff at the time. Like, I hired a bad hire at the time as an assistant, and honestly, like, that took a huge toll on me. Meaning, I think it put me into a bit of I think depression's an aggressive word, but it did take a toll on my mental health. Just the fact that I was wanting to do a positive culture, but I had an assistant coach who was fighting me. I had players who were hating their lives and quitting, and all this vision that I had wasn't coming to fruition, and it really messed with me. I ended up gaining a ton of weight. I didn't really care. I was making bad habits, sleeping in, and just, I just went to a super dark place. I mean, it got to the point where we had friends asking my husband, like, is she okay? So after that year, that spring, I decided I want to go to grad school. And I started taking grad classes that summer. And through lots of prayer and difficult conversations, the bad assistant left. And graduate school was really kind of opened my eyes to help me kind of dive into who I was and my experience as a coach. Your experiences are all unique and different, and I think that's something you need to understand. Like, having role models is super important, and having people you want to emulate is super important, but your experience is your own experience, and you need to dive into that and kind of reflect and how that shapes and molds your philosophy. And I think that was probably my biggest nugget of truth that I took away from graduate school. I learned a lot of different stuff, but my first class was athletic leadership, and that was something that just kept telling us, you've got to dive in, you got to coach your authentic self, and that's really what resonated with me. And again, I had to learn to make that switch from thinking that positivity meant soft to positivity is not about being soft or whatever. Positivity is about coaching through the negativity, addressing negativity, not running from confrontation, and fighting for a positive team culture and environment. I think, are most of us athletes in the room? Yeah? Trying to be. I feel that. So I think, like you all know as athletes, your relationship with your coach is so significant and important. And they have and whether you even recognize it or not, they have a larger influence over you than you might feel or recognize right now. So I think when you start looking into coaching, it's something you need to take seriously. And again, those relationships that you're going to have with your professors, with your students, is going to really stem from your story as a player, and your story and your convictions and your vision as a coach and that type of thing. So I think kind of going back to developing the positive culture, that's something that gets me fired up, talking about a culture. I learned about what not to do. Graduate school kind of helped shape me and helped me dive in what to do. And I think it kind of gave me the encouragement and the understanding to have the difficult conversations with my athletes. It's more to me about quality and not quantity. And again, the saying that I learned when I was in graduate school that stuck with me, and I'm sure you've all heard it before, is they won't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I think you all know, being college students, you're going to respond to somebody who actually gives a crap about you, who cares about you. I mean, that's outside of coaching. Those are the people that you respond to the most. And I think as a coach, that's something that you really need to genuinely invest and think about. If you want to get the best out of people, it's about diving into who they are as an individual, knowing what scares them, knowing what excites them, and those types of things. But before I talk more, does anyone have any questions?
Yes, Bri, you talked about the difficulties of hiring staff, some of the challenges. Let's just say some of the challenges of maybe not selecting the right person. How did you know, and what did you do about it?
When did I know she was the wrong hire?
Yes. Talk about your position on that.
I think the reason why this was a bad hire is because I was too focused on winning. Now, again, it's okay to enjoy winning. If you're a coach, I would hope you would like to win. If you're an athlete, I would hope you'd like to win. But I hired somebody who I thought was going to get us there, but I didn't really think about the in-betweens in terms of how is she going to interact with my kids, how is she going to fit in with the university, how is she going to drive or like hit the culture home? How is she going to implement that when I'm not standing there? And I think those are questions I left out when hiring her, but I knew she would help bring us to another level. And I think there was just that huge gap of, you know, she missed the mark when it came to our culture, and that affected everyone. I didn't really know that she was a bad fit until, I think it was just over a series of time within that year. Little things she was saying, like the little things. So like in her position, she wanted to be a head coach. And I think some really good advice I got from Andre Bernardi, actually, was work for the job you want, not the job you have. And, you know, I think in this particular case, she didn't want this job. And, you know, I think, and she had this mindset, I want to do something else. So she wasn't excelling where she was at. You can't get to where you want to be if you're scraping by with where you're currently at. I think that's a big roundabout answer to your question, I hope. But yeah, so I think again, it's just hard. Like hiring staff is very difficult. You're not always gonna get it right, and that's okay. But I think you as a head coach have to be willing to have difficult conversations with your staff. And sometimes that might look like telling them straight up, but like understand if you're gonna have a difficult conversation, it needs to be in the privacy of the office. Don't belittle your staff in front of the players. Don't belittle your staff in front of admin. There's a time and a place for constructive criticism, and I think in the office is where you need to have it. And also, when you hire your staff, you need to be abundantly clear about your expectations. And when the minute they step out of line, you need to call them back into focus. And that takes time, especially for new coaches. Like, we all want to be big and bad as new coaches, but like, I think you can't go on the expectation as a new coach or as an assistant coach with like demanding respect. You got to give respect to get respect. So, yeah. Yes?
What makes you keep going?
That's a good question. So like, what's my why?
Yeah.
What's your why? That's my why. So when I started coaching, I think my why has changed, and your why is supposed to sustain you. So I think initially my why was like, I just want to be around the sport. I just love lacrosse. Like, I'm pretty new to it. I just can't give it up. So I'm going to go in because I want to be around the sport, and I just love it so much. And eventually over time that kind of wears on you. You know, like when you get too much of something, it's just kind of like, okay, like I've had enough. But eventually my why was changed when the more my relationships with my players developed. It's hard to explain my why, I think, to put it and articulate in like specific words, and I don't want to use buzzwords. But I tell recruits, and I tell them, my team this, my why is this sounds kind of silly, but I want to be invited to their wedding one day, right? Like, I want to go to the wedding and see my former players on stage, and I look around, I see former players in the audience. You know, I very much want to be part of my players' lives after graduation. And I think with that, like, my hope, and I also think about like my own funeral. I know it sounds weird and really morbid, but when you think about your own funeral, like, who's gonna be there? You know, like, I don't want to limit it to just, you know, people that we knew in passing. Like, I'd love to look down one day and be like it's so full of former players and their families and that type of thing. So all that to say, like, my why is that I want to impact my players' lives. I want them to go out and feel confident, especially in a world that is the way that it is. I want them to feel confident about themselves and their own skin, with their own convictions, with their own stories. I want them to go out and the things that they learn by playing under me, that they can go out and encourage their families and their communities and their workplaces. So I think that's an excellent question. I think for all of us, I tell my players this: dive into your why. Why do you want to coach? If you want to win, that's really, really great, but eventually you're gonna be exhausted from being up and working for 12 hours straight, from losing time with your spouse, saying, no, I can't go to that family function, I have to go recruit. No, I can't go to that family function, I have a game. No, I can't go to this church event, I have to be here, I have to do this. Sometimes it looks like hospital visits at 3 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes it looks like being on the phone with a kid till midnight because she's in tears, whatever the case is. And I know that if you're all planning on coaching male sports, whether you want to admit it or not, you're going to deal with that too. It's not limited to just female sports. Like guys, there are mental health issues, and I think it's something that you all should think about as you're diving into coaching and just even your own selves individually. So yeah, that's my why. That's all I'm saying.
Do you feel like there was like a defining moment where you realized the pride that you had when you were starting to coach versus now where you feel like you have a lot more, like even just in the, like the, specifically like the why changing from like I want to win to I want to develop the women around me. Like how do you feel like there was a moment that was like a specific switch, or was it built up?
I think it was kind of a internal struggle for a few months, for maybe a few years even. And I think, I gotta say it, Enneagrams, like, do we know Enneagrams?
Yeah.
So like, I'm an 8, so I'm very much like, I don't do feelings, like your feelings are annoying, and I know I've said everything I've said, and I'm telling you how I feel about feelings. And that's not right, like that's my pride saying that, I know that, and the Lord certainly sanctified me through that. So, I saw teams like, as much as I hate to admit it, Dabo Sweeney at Clemson. I'm not a Clemson fan, sorry, but he's a good coach. Sorry, your Clemson sweatshirt, but he's a good coach. He loves his kids. He genuinely loves his athletes, and they're doing really well. Obviously, Clemson is killing it right now, and there are other coaches. Dawn Staley at South Carolina women's basketball. She loves her kids, and they're doing really well. Like, there was a pattern that I started to see with some of these more successful teams. And honestly, like, you kept hearing, I would get so frustrated with, well, why aren't my kids buying in? Why aren't they, getting after it on that extra sprint? And a lot of people will just kind of chalk it up to, oh, it's a generation thing. And I refuse to believe that because of Clemson, look what Clemson's doing, look what, South Carolina's basketball is doing. I refuse to believe it's a generational thing. I think it has everything to do with coaching and everything to do with the message and the cultures are developing at their programs. So I was like, why in the world are they doing it and I can't? They're the freaking same age. Like, why is this not working for me? So the more I kind of dove into it and listened to lectures and listened to different speakers and read different studies and all these types of things, it came down to leadership and how leadership was casting the vision for their program. And I think at first I thought, oh, like they'll figure it out. Like when I was a young coach, I thought like they'll get it. They'll develop their own traditions. They'll develop their own things. Like they don't need me to do that. Like I'm not their age. I'm way cooler. I'm way more mature, blah, blah, blah. And I think, again, that humbled me because I kept hearing it all comes back to leadership. How are they going to develop a culture when their own coach is not even painting that picture for them? And that stuck with me, and I kept hearing it over and over, and I was like, you know what? Let's do it. So I just kept reading into it, and I would hear about other programs and what they're doing, and I just and honestly, like a little secret for coaching, sometimes coaching is throwing it on the wall and seeing what sticks. And so I think culture, when you're developing your culture and your program, sometimes it looks like that. Sometimes things are going to work and stick, and you keep doing them, and other times they might not work, and that's okay. So that was kind of how I think our culture got developed with our program a little bit.
So I guess you and Coach Truss like to throw a lot of stuff at the wall and see if it sticks.
I think so. I think my wall's more covered. No, I'm just kidding.
And no, his is definitely not as covered. It's probably a bigger wall.
I like the stress. Yes.
I love stress.
What is the toughest lacrosse team you win against, the toughest lacrosse team you have coached against?
I love that. So I think a defining moment for our program with a win was over Pfeiffer. I don't know if a lot of you know much. I know football, you guys aren't in our conference, but so Pfeiffer is a historically really good program within our conference. They're now D3. This was in 2017. So okay, it was in 2017, we had literally 13 kids. 12 of those kids, like 12 played, and honestly, probably like 10 kids were, no, probably like 9 were actually healthy. So we were scraping by. We beat them in the quarterfinals of the conference tournament, and I think that's what like made other programs turn their heads and look at us. It was a struggle for obvious reasons in terms of numbers and like kind of coaching through the physicality. But I think we talked a lot about like, what's your why? Let's do this. Like, come on, like it's in you. And like everybody kind of felt this overall energy of this passion and desire. Like I had never coached a game. We were so much so on the same page. Everybody wanted to beat Pfeiffer that badly. And it just meant so much more to us than it did to them. So we beat them for the first time ever in program history. I knocked them out of the conference quarterfinals. It put us in the semifinals for the conference tournament, and that was like our signature win. And that's kind of what propelled us into where we're at now. Toughest game we played against and lost. So there's a,
When you say you played at conference, what's the toughest team you played personally?
oh, me?
Yeah.
Right. Toughest team I played against, we played a lot. Toughest team I played against, just in general.
This is like, yeah, this is general.
I think the toughest team I ever played against at the time was probably Limestone.
Okay.
At the time, they had a national championship appearance. They had 2 national championship appearances, got destroyed in one, and then lost by like 1 in the second. So they were ridiculous, that game. I remember Lacrosse now is a shot clock, thankfully. When I was playing, there was no shot clock, and we scored first. And I was playing defense that game, and I was yelling on the opposite side, like, hold the ball, like 1-0 the entire game, like, let's just keep it. But you can't do it against Limestone, they're not good. But Limestone, yeah, for sure. Oh, we're going, hold the ball, don't go, don't shoot with the cage, whatever.
So how do you maintain disciplinary action with athletes that's respectful among athletes but consistent with your philosophy?
That's a good question. So when it comes to discipline, I think not very many cases are black and white. I think it's there are situations that are different. You gotta understand, I think it's important to be effective in your discipline, is to know the kids personally, and that's where discipline becomes effective. I also think to be effective in your discipline, you need to love the kids all the times in between. So if my only interaction with my athletes was like, hey, you know what, Rachel, that's the 4th time I told you to stop going to cage, hit some bear crawls, but I never interact with her in between those times, my discipline would carry 0 weight. She would just be frustrated and angry and over it. So I think to be effective at discipline, you have to love and care and have relationships with your athletes outside of those times. So when it's time for discipline, it hurts. And I know that sounds really brutal, but if that's the point of disciplining is to learn something, it has to hurt. And when you love someone, we say this all the time in practice, when you love somebody, it's not always telling people what you want to hear, but telling them the truth. Like, you're better. And I demand more out of you, like you're not giving it your best effort or whatever. So I tell them, because I love you, you have to be disciplined because you didn't do this. So discipline for us, it does depend, I think, on the circumstance, but we do have very clear, cut and dry standards, like our late policy, our absent policy, things of that nature. Like, those are very clear, cut and dry. You messed up, you got bear crawls or whatever. But when it comes to other disciplinary actions, they're sometimes just different. It just really depends on the kid, the circumstance. And I think in those instances, it's important to listen first. If a kid has been a turd, for a few weeks now, and her attitude might be kind of crummy, and you need to discipline, I think it's important to talk to that individual, side to side, tell me what's going on, listen first, and then you can decide the best course of action from there. If that's, you need a break, or if that's, you know what, no, I'm not dealing with that, you're gonna have up downs or whatever the case may be. So it's very circumstantial. No, that's a
Then
fair
people
question, because
say
he
that-
asked me that too.
People say that all the time, and like, I kind of think it's stupid, because I'm a girl and I don't want to be treated different, but like, I know it happens, you know?
Yeah, yeah, so, yes and no. So I think I think sometimes as females, we can be a little sensitive to feminism. We can be a little oh, I'm a girl, they're doing this way. Maybe, maybe not, but probably not.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, I am really small, I understand, I look like a college student, I get it. Like, I'm not unaware of that. I do think it's important to, like, yes, I have experience with it, especially when it comes to recruits. A lot of, like, dads tend to think, like, I'm one of the players. So you have to, like, kind of present yourself, hi, I'm Coach Temples, you know, how are you? I think sometimes too, like, when it comes to maybe, you just gotta stick up for yourself. Sometimes it can be really easy to be overlooked and just be kind of like, well, she'll, you know, go in with whatever the plan is, but like, I think it's important that you speak up for your team and speak up for the struggles you face, like your team has felt and seen on whatever the situation may be. I do think as female coaches, I think sometimes like people want to tell you how to do your job. I don't know if that's limited to females. I'd imagine not, especially in coaching profession. Like, all the parents have the answers. They all know the right calls, right? But I do know, just in my experience, I've had more interactions dealing with dads, if I'm being totally honest, and them telling me, well, this player shouldn't be here, that wasn't the right call. And I think the best response in those moments is, thank you for your opinion, I'll take it into consideration, have a nice day. Like, you really can't give much life to it, because they're just gonna fester more. And honestly, when it comes to that kind of stuff, we started doing parent orientations with our freshmen, and I've had to sit in front of all the parents and say, let me tell you what we're not gonna talk about, and let's tell you what we can talk about. Like, we're not gonna talk about playing time, and we're not gonna talk about how to do my job, but we will talk about how the team's doing and ways you can help serve, but we're not gonna talk about how to do my job. So, I think laying groundwork with that regard is super important. In terms of discrimination in the coaching world in general, see, it's hard because the lacrosse world is such a big community of like bunch of lax loving like dudes. Like, there's a lot of mutual respect, especially in the coaching world. But I think it's just, again, I think it's just super important to speak out for the struggles you faced. I think there's a tactful way to do that. If you are having conflict with whatever the situation is and you feel like you're getting discriminated against, I think it's always important to approach your administration with facts, not opinions or feelings. So like, if you're feeling like I'm not getting enough, I don't know, turf time, here are the facts, blah, 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 this is when they practice, this is when we get on the turf, so on and so forth. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, that's a good point.
Okay. Do you have a question?
Do I have a question?
Yeah. Or you don't have to force it.
Oh!
Okay.
Especially being in North Greenville. How does not having fans, like a consistent amount of fans, like, cause I know like that environment of having fans, you know, like it's very influential to the players, but like as a coach in such a small environment, like how do you like keep that high environment for your team? Because obviously no one shows up to games.
I love that question, because I think D2 athletes, if there's anybody who loves the game, it's D2 athletes.
Facts.
Because I think the thing with D2, like, it's like the redheaded stepchild, because D1 gets the obvious studs, D3 gets a lot of studs, but D2 gets kind of overlooked, and like you said, there's like no fans, but D2 kids have the physical workload of D1 athletes and their school workload. They don't have tutors at every beck and call to do whatever they want for them.
Yeah.
So for D2, I think fans aren't really an issue for us, because we have kids who are here because they just love the game.
Yeah.
And they're just happy to play. I think especially now with everything going on with the COVID, like, I've seen so much joy from them playing because play into the wall.
Yeah.
And I think like with that kind of environment, to get fire from your team is to talk about your why. Like Corey asked about my why. I think we talk about our why as a team, and it's a continuous conversation. It's not something we talk about one day and we kind of don't ever address it again. Like, it's a continuous. All right, does someone want to share their why today? Or, you know, sometimes even when like the kids do like really tough workouts at the end, they're like, you know what, this is my why. So I think that's just got to be continuous conversation of what's your why. Because especially like last year we played Tampa, Rollins, and Queens. So to give you like an idea of how rough those teams are, out of the Southeast region for the NCAA tournament, there's 4 teams invited. Queens, Tampa, and Rollins were all invited. So we played four total nationally ranked teams last year. So of course our why was a big conversation because they're good. You gotta give credit to them. So.
Bree, tell us how you manage parents who can sometimes be motivated to impress upon you that their daughter needs to play more or needs to be involved more. You're overlooking some things, your stats aren't quite right. How do you manage parents?
So I think with, again, like, kind of similar to Millie's question, it's important to, if like we have our parent orientation where we say, parents, like, these are our boundaries. Like, you can be involved here, but you're not gonna be involved here. But I think the biggest thing with coaching, no matter what it is, if it's parents or athletes, is all about your follow through. And I learned that from my mom, who's not a coach. My mom had a great follow through. If she said, do that again, you'll get a spanking, like, she was excellent. She followed through all the time. So that's something I kind of learned from her. But so as a coach, if I'm going to tell parents these are our boundaries, I have to follow through with that when they're upset. So if we have a parent who's upset about a certain position, I don't think my daughter should be in that position. I think she should be playing here. It's like a, thank you, but with all due respect, I'm not going to have this conversation. So again, follow through on your boundaries or the precedents that you set. Yes?
How often do you get an upset parent?
Not very often. I think like when I was building my team and the culture, the vision that I had, I started getting more parents who bought in. So like when we have that meeting and I express like, we want to win a conference title, we're so close to winning a conference title, but it takes all of us and getting them involved. I think parents are a little bit more happier when they know they can be involved. A lot of times it's like, you send your kid to college and you can just kick him out the door, like, goodbye, mom and dad. Like, we had you the recruiting process, we sold you, but now, like, we're wiping our hands with you. I think that is a little misleading, especially if you're trying to communicate and develop a positive environment, a positive culture, because your parents, the parents of your players, are your biggest, like, advocates. They're gonna be the ones who, for your players, who, like, when they call them crying or upset, your parents are the one, hey, like, you're doing this for a reason. You know, so you want your parents to be involved. But I think it comes to painting the picture and setting the boundaries of this is where you can be involved and this is where you're not going to be involved. So.
Tell us a little about your recruiting philosophy. Do you look for good students, good players, or good Christians? And don't assume they're all the same.
Sure. Recruiting. So recruiting is honestly like casting a huge net and maybe getting a couple on campus, and of those few on campus, you might get one, and that's a win. However, the recruiting starts after, like, so if you go to this tournament and you cast this net, and you find these kids, and then you start getting phone calls and visits lined up, it's super, super important to me to look into those kids' social medias, and I know like how we all feel about that. We're all like, oh, it's so annoying. But my thing is I don't want to recruit 35 kids, and of those 35, like 10 graduate. I'd much rather have, what's the word I'm looking for? Sustained rosters. I'd rather have a better turnaround rate. Is that right? So I do look at their social medias. Also, when I'm recruiting, I'm pretty honest about North Greenville. I tell kids straight up, if you want to party, this is not the place for you. I know it happens. I'm not naive, but what I'm saying is, my point is like in general, if you're looking for that fraternity sorority life, North Greenville's not the place, but I also tell them, like, that's okay, and that's why you're here, is to kind of figure that out. But also, some of those conversations are even eliminated just based off the things I've seen on social media. And if you've recruited enough kids, you're gonna figure out, okay, like, no, maybe. Also, grades are super important. So, like, I know we all know this, but if I have a kid, like, I've like dropped some kids because I thought they were really good, but their GPAs were pretty bad. Like, I just can't afford them. They're probably not gonna come here anyway. It's gonna be too expensive for them. So it's just better off just not to kind of deal with that. But again, the recruiting process, again, like, with your team culture and your vision for your program, you have to recruit within that lens. And sometimes you might get kids who fooled you, and that happens. But if they come onto your program and they're a cancer to your program, like, you've got to know when it's time to, like, kind of cut relationships. And again, I think that comes from setting that standard, that precedent early, and all about your follow through. So if you have a kid who comes on, you thought he or she was great, they come onto your program, they kind of went by the recruiting process pretty smooth, they come into your program, and now they're tearing relationships apart, they're a problem. You can, like, give them a couple chances. Hey, like, we don't do that here. We do on our team have a chain of command of how we handle discipline and drama. And if it gets all the way up to me, I tell them, if it gets all the way up to me, this problem gets all the way up to me, everybody's gonna be sad. So I think it just depends, again, like, on the kid, the disparity thing, like I had mentioned. But again, it's all about, like, you can't be afraid to cut ties with that kid, because if they're not gonna handle in your program very well, chances are they're not gonna hang around the school very well, and it's a wash. It happens to everybody.
Where are you going as a coach next 5, 10 years?
I don't expect to retire in 10 years, but I would like to eventually retire as an AD. I tell people all the time, like, when it comes to my time at North Greenville, you've heard my story. I think the Lord very clearly brought me here, and I do think the Lord's gonna make it clear when it's time for me to go. So I, like, you know, of course, the Lord's opened that door for me for coaching. Again, I say all the time, there's only a few things in my life that I know for certain, and coaching one of those things that He said, this is what I'm doing, this is what you're gonna do for my kingdom. And so I do believe this is where He wants me. So when it comes to moving on, I think of, like, between now and the AD, I would like to coach at a small D1 school, like a Furman or a Wofford or that type of school. I think UNC, like the big state schools, are a little too much for me because their recruiting is like the Wild Wild West. But that's kind of my little map for myself.
Do you recommend grad school for coaching? I know you went and did yours while you were coaching.
I do. I think GAs are, especially, like, I know with football, like, kind of that route is a GA. That's like your next step. I think it, like, major in something that's gonna, if you're gonna be a GA, major in something that's gonna be worth your time. But also, like, as a GA, it's not gonna be glamorous. You're gonna do a lot of stuff you don't wanna do. You're gonna have to do laundry and things that you're gonna be like, oh, this is so stupid, I hate this, this is what coaches do. But to get where you wanna be, you're gonna do stuff you don't wanna do. And part of GA-ship falls under that category sometimes. So yeah, I would recommend grad school, especially, like, for me, I didn't have much experience in coaching. I didn't ever work under a head coach who was wise and great and wonderful and who kind of walked with me. I kind of had to, like, learn on my own. So, like, grad school was that option for me. And honestly, in this day and age with coaches, schools like grad school. Like, if they're hiring you, they like to see graduate school on your resume, because that's what stands out. Because undergrads really, like, aren't that special anymore. Don't carry as much weight. So graduate school kind of helps set you apart in that regard. Did you have a question?
Yeah, so with it being a Christian institution, how well do you manage, like, incorporating a Christian worldview into your coaching? And have you ever had the privilege of, like, leading someone to Christ as a coach?
So I think integrating Christianity into your program, I think for a couple things, and I don't hope this doesn't come across the wrong way. I also don't want to oversaturate. I do want to, obviously I talk about my faith, and my players know where I stand on my faith. We do talk about the Lord, especially when it comes to things like our why and things like that. But I think it all comes back to how you start and develop your culture. And with that kind of comes developing your leaders. And hopefully the goal is they start doing Bible studies on their own. Like our team does a Bible study on their own because they want to. And I think that kind of comes with, again, establishing that culture, talking about your why. Also, in terms of integrating Christianity, just similar to how we should be with like our church, it's super important to let your players into your lives. Of course, there are obvious boundaries, but like my players have been to my house. They know my husband. They babysat my dogs. Don't have kids, so they babysat my dogs. Some of them know my parents. So when you can integrate them into your lives, they trust you more. So I think that kind of opens the door up for those conversations. I haven't had the chance yet to one-on-one sit down and lead a girl to Christ. However, I have had lots and lots of conversations about that. I think sometimes it's helping them kind of navigate what that looks like and different struggles they have. Like sometimes kids will come talk to me about things they don't feel comfortable talking to their parents about. So that's my opportunity to kind of talk a little bit about the gospel and what Jesus says about this or whatever it is. So maybe one day. But again, I think
how about some recommendations
for reading?
young budding coaches to read experiences these folks want to coach? What do they need to do?
I think when it comes to young budding coaches, don't limit your knowledge of your sport to just your sport. Like if you're a lacrosse person, watch basketball and football and soccer, and I would say that for any sport. Watch sports. Don't limit yourself to, if you're a football guy, don't limit yourself to just football. Like watch sports. ESPN stays on our TV in our household, and like just different things come on all the time. Now, if we watch it or not, that's up to, depends on the day, I guess. But like we keep ESPN, like you turn on right now, it's on ESPN. Watch sports. That'll enhance your knowledge of like observing coaches and how they interact with their players, but also it'll help enhance your knowledge of the game itself. And I know like that sounds kind of weird, but like in general, athleticism is essentially all the same movement. I don't know if that makes any sense, but like watch sports. I can't say that enough. I would even say read books. When I was in college, like I was like I said, an English major. I didn't love to read. I read a lot of major British writing. Didn't like it. But again, I knew that because I wasn't really mentored, I kind of had to self-teach some stuff. So if it's stuff that I'm interested in, like coaching, I'm going to read a lot. So I think Conscious Coaching by Brett Bartholomew is a great book. He talks about the different types of learners and how they process information, so that's super interesting. Rachel's know what I'm going to say. Anything by John Gordon is fantastic. John Gordon talks a lot about culture. So in terms of developing and creating your own cultures within your programs, anything by John Gordon is great. John Gordon is like BFF with Dabo Sweeney. So I think Dabo Sweeney is a good first-hand account of what it means to apply things that John Gordon has learned. I'm trying to think of some other books that I've read. I'm currently reading, I don't know if you've heard the book Good to Great. I'm reading Good to Great in God's Eyes. So the writer has kind of put a spin on Good to Great in terms of like what the Lord says about greatness, which is super fascinating. I read a Coach K book, Lead with the Heart by Coach K from Duke men's basketball. There's actually a documentary out on Netflix right now called The Playbook, I think. Doc Rivers is on there, Dawn Staley's on there. Her name escapes me, but the USWNT coach is on there. I haven't watched it yet, but it's probably gonna be super good. Listen to podcasts. I listen to a podcast about recruiting, and it talks a lot about, the guy did a lot of research when it comes to recruiting. So as a coach, especially at the college level, recruiting is your lifeblood. That'll keep your job. So he talks about the science of recruiting, so that is super helpful when you go out and you try to bring kids on. Science and just recruiting by the numbers and that kind of thing, so. Yeah. Oh, did we go over?
Okay.
Oh, we're good.
Anybody else? We'll wrap it up here. Okay. Thank you, Brianna.
There we go.